Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says Australia will disagree with China, but we can still be friends. Auction clearance rates hit a 7-month low and Taylor Swift becomes a billionaire. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It's Monday, the 30th of October, 2023. I'm Adam Lang, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Adam.
Immediately after this episode, Sean, we can stay listening for your chat with Nicola Powell, Chief Economist at Domain.
Yes, so plenty going on in the housing market. We'll talk about auction clearance rates in a moment. We talked to Nicola about what she thinks prices are going to do over the next 12 months or so. The better performing capital cities, they're not so well performed capital cities. If you're into housing, great chat with Nicola.
So moving to the main story this morning, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, at the end of his trip to the USA and ahead of this week's China tour, yesterday said Australia had a role to build guardrails between the militaries of the world's two largest economies.
Yes, so Albanese said Australia's relationship with China is important because they're our major trading partner, taking about 25% of our export dollars. The US is Australia's largest two-way investment partner, think exports and imports, and that relationship is important economically as well as strategically. It's a fine line Australia and the Prime Minister need to walk. And Albanese said Canberra and Beijing will cooperate where we can and disagree where we must. He said the two countries disagree on the basis of our political systems, on issues of human rights, on issues such as access to the South China Sea and the Taiwan Straits, and he'll continue to put those positions strongly, clearly, and directly to China. He was talking to the ABC yesterday. Having straight talks with Beijing is an important way to build Australia's relationship with the country. That's what Albanese reckons.
Sean, what did the Prime Minister have to say about his trip to the USA?
Well, he said he's confident that the US Congress will pass the necessary legislation to allow the manufacture of AUKUS submarines. That really is the bottom line goal of that trip. He really wanted Congress, which of course hasn't had a speaker for about 3 weeks, to get on board in terms of building those ships. Albanese also said he raised the case of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange with US President Joe Biden, repeating his stance that the Australians' detention should be brought to a conclusion.
Sean, we've talked about the USA and China, so before we leave politics, what is the latest on the Middle East?
Thousands of people attended rallies in Melbourne and Sydney over the weekend in a show of solidarity with Israel and to ask for the release of hostages being held in Gaza. Perhaps we'll leave the international news on Gaza till later in the show. While we are still on politics and still overseas, there were reports yesterday on Bloomberg that the European Union and Australia are heading into a critical round of free trade talks, with both sides warning that a failure to strike a deal now could delay any potential agreement by months or even years. Now, remember, talks broke down 3 months ago, but EU Trade Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis and Australia's Trade Minister Don Farrell met in Japan over the weekend. Apparently, don't know whether they're back on again, but at least we're moving in the right direction.
That's great news. Sean, looking at the markets now, how did they perform on Friday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed up just a touch to 6,827 points. Couldn't stop last week being the second straight week of losses for the bourse. Consumer staples, the defensive sector, was best performing, helped by a jumping Coles share price. For the week, the market was down more than 1%. Now, among the large caps on Friday, National Australia Bank and Commonwealth Bank rose by almost 1%. So too did Woolworths, Transurban and Santos. Macquarie and Wesfarmers were among the underperformers. And just while I'm talking markets, I'll run through what's going on internationally. Oil and gold prices are higher. And Adam, the Aussie dollar begins the week worth 63.4 US cents.
We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Auction clearance rates have fallen to their lowest level in 7 months, following last week's higher than expected inflation figures and the subsequent increasing likelihood of a rate rise next week.
Preliminary results show 68.5% of the reported auctions over the combined capital cities were successful. That's about 2.3 percentage points lower than the previous week. Might not sound much. That's a lot of houses, though. And remember, it's spring selling season, prime time for auctions. Now, it wasn't just interest rates to blame. Part of the reason, no doubt, is that the number of auctions surged to nearly 3,400. That's the largest volume since before Easter last year. In Sydney, clearance rates fell by 3.4 percentage points to 70.8% as auction volumes jumped by more than 20%, according to CoreLogic. In Melbourne, clearance rates held steady at 68.6%. What was really impressive about that is that there's a 50% rise in auction volumes, yet they kept that clearance rate like that. In the smaller capital cities, Brisbane cleared nearly 59% of the reported results. Adelaide posted a very impressive 85% preliminary clearance rate. That's the only capital city to record a rise, at least among these preliminary rates.
Sean, SafeWork Australia has recommended a complete ban on engineered stone, finding that no evidence that lower silica engineered stone posed less risk to worker health and safety, and there was a risk of non-compliance with any regulations.
It was a pretty black and white report. It says, and I quote, "The risks posed by working with engineered stone are serious, and the possible consequences of being exposed to RCS generated by engineered stone are severe and sometimes fatal," end quote. It goes on to say that there's evidence of continued non-compliance with regulations despite significant education and awareness-raising activities, as well as enforcement action by regulators. The report found a lower silica content engineered stone was not expected to result in improvements in compliance, and that the features of the sector that have contributed to the current levels of non-compliance remain.
Sean, that's a damning report. What happens from here?
Well, the industry, there are plenty of people in the industry who are very much against the report's findings. The government needs to act on it or not act on it, but plenty of jobs at stake here. It's not a clear cut. Just because SafeWork Australia has said it's dangerous, it doesn't mean that the government will do anything, but they'll certainly be under pressure to do so.
We'll follow the story from here. Sean, the number of motorbikes on the road has fallen, but the number of scooters has risen.
Are you a motorbike man, Adam?
Well, I'd like to be. I used to as a kid on farms and stuff, but never on the road. And I've thought about it, but never done it.
Do you think it's, I don't know, losing credibility if I say I really want to be a scooter man, not a motorbike man?
No, I think it's a great idea.
Hey, I want to be a scooter man, totally. A total of just under 69,000 motorcycles and what's known as off-highway vehicles was sold in the first 9 months of this year, according to the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries. That's off more than 2% from last year. But in actual fact, bike sales are enjoying a purple patch, in part due to COVID. The local two-wheeler market is considered mature and generally stable. Sales pre-COVID were in the 70 to 80,000 unit range per year, that is. Then they went to almost 94,000 in 2021. That was peak COVID. That was the best year in 2 decades. They came back last year but remained above 90,000 units. In terms of the leading manufacturers, in terms of sales, any idea, Adam, who'd be number one?
Honda?
Yep. Honda's number one, has been for a long time. Then Yamaha, KTM and Kawasaki. Scooters are only a small part of the market, 6.4%, but sales are actually growing as opposed to what's happening with motorbikes. In fact, they're up 9% this year compared to 2022.
Sean, supermarket giant Aldi is facing a class action for allegedly deliberate underpayments of more than 20,000 workers, totaling $150 million.
The Shop Distributive and Allied Employees Association has launched the legal action in the federal court, alleging Aldi breached workplace laws over 6 years by requiring its employees to work up to 30 minutes before their shift without pay. The work-related tasks included till changes, cashing up the register, performing safety checks, emptying bins, and checking communication devices, according to the Financial Review. The SDA is claiming that these practices were deliberate and systemic, meaning Aldi could face significant penalties. It estimates the average worker could be eligible for $7,500 in compensation. This case follows on from a federal court ruling last year, which found that Aldi underpaid workers at a New South Wales distribution centre by directing them to start work 15 minutes before their rostered start time. The SDA says that while Aldi signalled that they would conduct an internal audit of workers' pay following this, the company has failed to rectify this and adequately compensate workers.
Sean, Harvey Norman is the country's largest white goods and home retailer, and pre-tax profits halved in the September quarter with a rapid slowdown in sales.
Turnover in the stores in Australia and overseas, and that includes Harvey Norman, Domain and Joyce Main, fell by 9% during the period. Now, that compared to a 12% drop at competitor The Good Guys, which is owned by JB Hi-Fi. Chair of Harvey Norman, Jerry Harvey, said foot traffic was down between 20 and 25%, and sales had fallen by more than expected. People are prioritising travel over home goods, and regional areas are doing better than cities. That's what's come out of the data. Harvey, certainly a noted optimist, said he thought October, November and December would be reasonable. Harvey Norman's share price fell initially, but then rose during the day and ended up about 4% on Friday.
That's a remarkable story. Speaking of remarkable, Gina Rinehart was reportedly buying shares in Azure Minerals just hours after it agreed to a $1.6 billion buyout.
This has got all the makings of a great story. So Reinhardt has now bought an 18% stake in Azure, according to The Australian. She bought on Thursday and Friday. Her raid began on the same day the company announced to the market it had reached a deal for lithium mining heavyweight SQM to buy the business for $1.6 billion. Now, that move saw Azure's shares soar, jumping 43% to close at $3.49. Obviously helping was that Reinhardt was in the market buying. Back in January, each share was worth 22 cents, so the company's up 1,500% this year. Reinhardt's raid comes just weeks after she raided the register of lithium producer Liontown Resources. In that instance, she bought 19.9% at up to $3 a share. That was the same price being offered by Liontown's suitor, Albemarle. Albemarle ultimately dropped the bid. When someone holds almost 20% of the register and doesn't want to sell, it is very difficult to do a takeover. So it'll just be interesting to see whether this one on Azure Minerals follows the same path as happened at Liontown. I'm sure there are a lot of shareholders at Azure hoping it doesn't.
Sean, 1,500% increase in share price this year. That is phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Adam, I don't want to boast, but that was my most remarkable story in our weekend edition. It was a great weekend edition because it was you v me. Normally you're the judge. Michael Thompson's obviously away on holidays. You v me. We had Stephen Koukoulas, our resident economist, as our judge. Almost impartial. And I do believe I won that one. But if you're interested, it is well worth a listen to the weekend show. We talk about our favourite stories. Actually, we talk a lot of dribble, but also a good wrap of the week, I'd say.
Sean, I got completely towed up by you on that one, but I still had a great time doing it.
It was good fun.
Yeah. Let's turn now to the annual general meeting season, and it's another big week with the boards of Endeavour Group, BHP, Domino's, Coles and Qantas facing shareholders. Some of the companies face strikes against remuneration reports.
So far this AGM season, 9 companies have suffered protest votes against remuneration reports, according to the Australian Shareholders Association. They're Atlas Arteria, that's the toll road group, AMP, Nufarm, Treasury Wine Estates, Tabcorp, Dexus, property giant ALS, APA and Woolworths. If boards receive protest votes of more than 25%, then they receive a strike, 2 strikes in 2 years, and the whole board needs to spill. The 2 particularly interesting ones this week will be Endeavour and Qantas. I'm sure we'll be talking more about them.
I think I'll be tuning in directly.
Yes, it'd be well worth it.
Sean, moving to international news now, and in Gaza, telephone and internet connections are returning gradually after the region lost connectivity over the weekend amid the heaviest aerial bombardment of the war so far.
Yeah, so they're getting connectivity back. Also, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared the conflict with Hamas a second war of independence for the Jewish state, confirming that the military's ground entry into Gaza had moved to a second stage to ensure our survival in this country. And there are also reports that Hamas has stockpiled vital fuel, medicines and food, while ordinary Gazans are running short of essentials. Both Arab and Western officials have said Hamas has been stockpiling supplies for years, which it has stored in tunnels as it prepares for the possibility of a protracted war. The terrorist group spent 2 decades building a labyrinth network of underground tunnels, estimated to be 480 kilometres long, with entrances hidden beneath schools, mosques and houses.
Sean, while Hamas might have supplies, the civilians seemingly just don't.
Yeah, it's a very sad situation.
Awful. Sean, finishing on something much more positive, Taylor Swift is now officially a billionaire with the success of her Eras tour and the movie associated with it, pushing her into super rich status.
She's one of the few entertainers to reach the $1 billion mark, according to Bloomberg News. Not just her singing, it's her marketing as well. Maybe it's more about her marketing. Bloomberg said Taylor Swift Eras Tour has generated as much money as the economies of small countries. The movie version is ruling the box office. Her new recording of a 9-year-old album, 1989, is expected to be one of the hottest selling records of the year. In fact, she's re-recorded her first 6 albums this year. Genius. Absolute genius. The singer's 53 US concerts this year added $4.3 billion to the country's gross domestic product, according to estimates from Bloomberg. What's it all mean? Where's that money now? Well, her music catalogue's worth $400 million. Concerts worth $370 million. Streaming's about $120 million. She's got 5 properties. They're worth about $110 million. $80 million from record sales. Pushes her over that $1 billion mark.
What a sensational story. And up next, Sean, is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Nicola Powell from Domain.
All about the housing market, what's happened, what's going to happen. If you're interested in a property in Australia, and who isn't, Adam, you should tune in.
I'm certainly interested, and I really like Nicola Powell's perspective, so I'll definitely be listening. That's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your favourite podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Also up next in the playlist is Fear and Greed the Week Ahead with Stephen Koukoulas, where he and Sean look at the major economic indicators from last week and what we can look forward to this week. It's well worth a listen. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Adam.
It's Monday, the 30th of October, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, and Facebook. I hope you have a great day.